The Vietnam War was unlike any conflict Australians had faced before. By the early 1960s, the Cold War dominated global politics, and Southeast Asia became a frontline in the ideological struggle between communism and democracy. In 1965, at the request of the United States and South Vietnam, Australia committed combat troops. What began as military advisors soon escalated into full battalions. Over 60,000 Australians would eventually serve in Vietnam. For many, service was not voluntary. Through the controversial National Service Conscription Lottery, young men had their birth dates drawn at random. If your birthday was called, you were sent to war. Some had never traveled outside Australia. Others were just finishing school. The Australians established their base at Nui Dat, a low, scrub-covered hill in Phuoc Thi province. The region was deceptively calm, sprawling rice paddies, small hamlets, and vast rubber plantations owned by French companies. But beneath the quiet, danger loomed. Intelligence revealed that Viet Cong regiments, including the powerful 275th Regiment, were moving through the area. They were seasoned fighters, disciplined, determined, and familiar with every track and hidden tunnel. The Australians, fresh and relatively inexperienced, were about to face their greatest test. It began as an ordinary Thursday. Soldiers at Nui Dat went about their routines, eating breakfast, checking weapons, writing quick letters home. Then, at 11:15 a.m., the calm was shattered. The sharp whistle of incoming mortar rounds filled the air, followed by violent explosions. Shells slammed into the base, ripping through tents, smashing vehicles, and showering shrapnel across the compound. 24 men were injured in just minutes. The bombardment lasted only a few moments, then silence. The Viet Cong had vanished back into the jungle. Australian commanders immediately realized this was not random harassment. The mortar attack was a probe designed to lure them out. Somewhere in the plantation, a much larger force was waiting. By 12:30 p.m., orders were given. Patrols would sweep east toward the suspected enemy position. Leading the mission was D Company, 6th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment. Just 108 men, commanded by Major Harry Smith, a tough but steady leader who demanded discipline from his soldiers. With rifles slung, packs heavy, and ammunition limited, the young men of D Company marched into the heat and humidity of the long, tan rubber plantation. The plantation stretched for miles, neat rows of rubber trees standing like silent sentinels. Their trunks were evenly spaced, giving the illusion of order, but every shadow could hide danger. Above, dark clouds gathered. The monsoon was coming. At around 3:15 p.m., forward scouts spotted movement. Figures darting between the trees. Seconds later, gunfire erupted. The sharp crack of AK-47s echoed through the plantation. The Australians returned fire immediately, their FNs and M60s roaring to life. At first, it seemed manageable, a small group of Viet Cong testing their defenses. But within minutes, the jungle erupted with gunfire from multiple directions. By 4 p.m., it became clear D Company had walked into the path of a massive enemy force. Later, intelligence would confirm it. More than 2,000 Viet Cong soldiers, the 275th Regiment, supported by local guerrillas. And now, just 108 Australians faced them, cut off deep inside the plantation. By 4:15 p.m., the sky opened. Torrential monsoon rain poured down, blinding visibility and soaking the soldiers to the bone. Radios crackled and failed under the water, while mud swallowed boots and weapons. The Viet Cong attacked in waves, screaming war cries, firing machine guns, and trying to encircle the Australians from three sides. Major Smith ordered his men to dig in along the rows of trees, forming defensive lines. The young soldiers held firm, firing controlled bursts, every shot critical. Many were just 19 or 20 years old, fighting for their lives in a foreign land. At 4:30 p.m., artillery support was called from Nui Dat. Radio operators shouted coordinates through the rain, barely audible over gunfire. Within minutes, the ground around the Australians shook violently as New Zealand and Australian artillery batteries unleashed a storm of shells. Trees shattered, the earth erupted, and the air filled with deafening blasts. The artillery was dangerously close, sometimes landing just 50 meters from Australian lines, but it was the only thing preventing them from being overrun. Still, the Viet Cong pressed harder. By 5 p.m., the battle reached a terrifying intensity. Hundreds of Viet Cong surged forward, rifles blazing, grenades exploding. The Australians fired back with everything they had, mowing down attackers in the sheets of rain. The rubber plantation had become a nightmare. Smoke mixed with rain, mud mixed with blood. Soldiers screamed orders over the chaos, while stretcher-bearers risked their lives dragging the wounded out of the line of fire. At one point, enemy fighters closed to within 30 meters. Several Australians recalled thinking they would not survive. Then came the most critical moment. By 5:45 p.m., ammunition was running dangerously low. Some soldiers had only a single magazine left. Without bullets, the line would collapse. Then, salvation came from above. Through the storm, Royal Australian Air Force Iroquois helicopters from 9 squadrons swooped in low, braving enemy fire. From their doors, crewmen threw crates of ammunition into the plantation. Soldiers ripped them open, handing rounds down the line under heavy fire. That resupply kept D Company alive. At 6:30 p.m., as daylight began to fade, the Viet Cong launched one final, massive assault. Hundreds more fighters surged from the treeline, determined to finish the job. But this time, the Australians were ready. Resupplied with ammunition and supported by relentless artillery fire. More than 3,500 shells fired in just 3 hours. They stood their ground. Then, the sound that every soldier had been praying for, the rumble of armored engines. At 7 p.m., reinforcements arrived. Armored personnel carriers from 1st APC Squadron, accompanied by a company, smashed into the plantation. Their heavy guns lit up the darkness, cutting through Viet Cong ranks. The enemy faltered. By 7:30 p.m., under relentless fire and mounting casualties, the Viet Cong began to withdraw. The Australians had survived. When dawn broke on August 19, 1966, the full horror was revealed. The plantation floor was littered with bodies, 245 Viet Cong dead officially counted, though intelligence suggested more than 500 killed or wounded. Weapons, packs, and blood trails marked their retreat. D Company had held against impossible odds, but the cost was heavy. 18 Australians lay dead, and 24 were wounded. For a company of just 108 men, the toll was devastating. Survivors later described the silence after the battle, a silence heavier than the gunfire. The faces of their fallen friends, the exhaustion, the disbelief that they were still alive. The Battle of Long Tan became one of the most extraordinary victories in Australian military history. Outnumbered 20-1, the Australians had stood firm against overwhelming odds. But recognition was slow. The Vietnam War grew deeply unpopular back home. Many veterans returned to indifference, even hostility. Their bravery in the rubber plantation was overshadowed by politics. Decades later, however, the battle was finally honored. Medals were awarded. Ceremonies held. And August 18th was officially declared Vietnam Veterans Day in Australia. A day to remember not just Long Tan, but every Australian who served in Vietnam. For the men who survived, Long Tan was both pride and trauma. They had fought together, held together, and survived together, but never came home the same. Major Harry Smith reflected years later. We were young, we were scared, but we stood our ground. We did our duty. That's all any soldier can do.